Jain, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi on News That Matters. This is my update on the NATO summit, which concluded a day ago, as well as the Ukraine war. Very interesting developments have taken place in the past couple of days, and I thought let me just compile them up and share them with you. Let's talk about the war first. The last time when we were talking about the war, there was a battle going on in a city called Severodonetsk within the eastern part of Ukraine. It is a part of the Luhansk region of the Donbass, as per se. Currently, the latest updates, and this is something that has been acknowledged by both the sides, is the fact that Severodonetsk as a city has fallen to the Russians. The battle has actually moved on to a city called Lysychansk, which is like a twin city to this Severodonetsk area. A couple of other interesting news that came out of in the past couple of days is the factor that there is this small island off the coast of Romania. As a matter of fact, this particular island is known as the Snake Island, and this was an island that the Russians had taken up right at the first few days of the war. The Russians have declared that they have actually gone ahead and vacated or evacuated from this island, saying that this would lead to some confidence to the Ukrainians to start putting out their wheat and start their wheat trading, which is something that the Ukrainians have been saying that the Russians have been blocking within the Black Sea. Now, this is an interesting development. The Ukrainians, of course, are celebrating victory over that place because this island has been contested. There have been almost three or four attacks that have been done by the Ukrainians to ensure to capture this particular island, and the Russians have been able to repulse them back. But now that the Russians have left, uh, the Ukrainians actually are coming out and saying that it is because of the artillery fire and the rocket fire that they were able to manage on the island. The Russians have left that particular place. The reality is something I'd leave you to judge. Some very big strikes in terms of missile strikes that have taken place from the Russians into Ukraine, especially during the NATO summit. The Russians fired some 14 or 18 missiles into Ukraine, especially into Kiev. And there was a big, huge news about a missile hitting a mall where there were about 1,000 people. The reported death in that particular strike is supposed to be about 32. These are reports that are coming out of Ukraine. At the moment, I wouldn't have any ways of authenticating it. On the other hand, the Russians do mention that they had conducted these big strikes within Ukraine, and they talk about destroying Ukrainian civilian slash military infrastructure within that country. It'll be interesting to actually see going forward what exactly happened during these strikes. Couple of interesting news that are coming out of Ukraine is that the time spent by the Ukrainians to kind of fight a particular city is seen to be reducing a little bit. That just kind of hints you towards the lowering of morale that is taking place. Obviously, because of the huge losses that the Ukrainians are undergoing, and this is something that has not been claimed by the Russians. The Ukrainians themselves have accepted losses up for up to about 1,000 men a day. So that obviously will have a lot of effect. Something that I mentioned in my last broadcast as well, I am not a military expert, but it kind of fails me to understand why they would be fighting in a non defendable area with orders to stand and fight to the last man. You would just live to fight another day. But I guess they've got something in their mind, and that's something that only they will be able to tell you. A lot of things have happened in the past 4 odd months uh, you know, since the time the Ukraine war has started. And I've got a question here from Chirag who says, what will be the effect of NATO accepting Finland and Sweden? Chirag, I'll just tell you to hang on. I've got a nice little, small little history lesson for you with regards Finland and Sweden and the repercussions of this particular action, what the Russians are saying and what NATO is saying. I'll cover that in about 2 or 3 minutes. Coming back to what I was talking about is Ukraine fatigue. One of the things that we notice is that people are basically getting bored talking about the Ukraine war. And this was something that was identified by Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of uh, of the United Kingdom, as well as a lot of people jokingly call him the Prime Minister of Ukraine. This was reported by the BBC. He talks about the factor that it is becoming difficult to sell this war to the world and keep them interested within the daily happenings of this war. An interesting debate about the oil which is passing around the place around the world is actually taking place. There was a news that was reported by the Bloomberg, and this is a Western media channel, mind you, which says that Russian oil disappears as tankers go dark near the Azores. These are a group of islands in the middle of nowhere, literally. They talk about unseen ship to ship transfers that take place in the middle of the Atlantic, and some eastbound cargoes are also vanishing mid voyage. I wonder who's actually taking these, oil, to which country is it going, and why are these kind of things happening in the middle of the ocean? There was a news that the US had reported. This was reported by the Wall Street Journal, none other, is that the US authorities, and I quote, by the way, stopped a ship loaded with Russian oil and products on its way to Louisiana on sometime in the last week. It talks about the ship that departed in early June from a peninsula called the Taman Peninsula in Russia, and which was headed towards America. It talks about the fact that the Wall Street Journal goes forward and actually says that Kazakh oil products are also used by the US, and they are not under any sort of ban. The Kazakh oil products normally go through Russia into Russian ports in the northern Atlantic and then get transported all around the world. That's sort of a justification which is being given. Let's talk about the adoption, if I may say, of a resolution by the Ukraine Parliament to kind of make give Moldova as well as Ukraine uh, the membership or a candidacy membership for the European Union. This is interesting because there are already 7 recognized candidates for membership of the European Union. First of all, Turkey, which applied in 1987, North Macedonia in 2004, Montenegro in 2008, Albania in 2009, Serbia in 2009, Ukraine and Moldova in 2022. Is this a symbolic gesture, or is this move of some sort of a stature or some sort of a support that the European Union is planning to give, especially Ukraine, is something that we'll have to go forward and see. The world is full of mistakes in terms of military mistakes that have led to some very great wars. I'd mentioned a couple of military mistakes and the fear of military mistakes in the Indo-Pacific in my last update. I think it was the episode 3. I'd like to take you to an incident that happened on the 20th of June, wherein an Iranian uh, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy coastal patrol ship actually went past a USS Sirocco, which is a expeditionary fast transport vehicle, in the Persian Gulf. This was very, very dangerous because these kind of incidents are known as, normally known as harassment on the open seas, happens, but with kind of the tensions between US and Iran are a little bit dangerous at this moment. Having said that, there were news last week that the US and Iran would sit down and have their conversation on the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, to revive it back. But yesterday there was a meeting that took place in Doha that lasted for less than an hour. One can only imagine where they got stuck in the hellos, or I wonder. The Iranians actually say that the US regime is weak and incompetent and incomprehensible to their particular demands. Iran basically demands verifiable, objective uh, promises from the United States that they would not back off from the JCPOA, as was done by Donald Trump. US says there is no legal way that we can actually actually promise something like that, as we cannot be influencing a future administration of some other president to do so. Israel has been watching these developments very carefully. They've been there is developments with regards Indian or the Western Quad, as per se. I'll deal with that in a separate discussion with one of my eminent panelists. But the Israelis, in spite of political turmoil, they're going through probably the third election in 5 years. Uh, there's another a dissolution of the Knesset, and but still they are looking at the JCPOA and the subsequent moves that the Iranians are making within the region with a lot of focus, and reportedly are practicing raids on Iranian nuclear facilities. The Turkish media, as a matter of fact, there was a news sometime back that the Iranians supported certain groups would try and create a little bit of a false flag operation between Israel and Iran to create some sort of a chaos. In that aspect, the Turkish media reported that they had arrested about 10 members of the Iranian intelligence within Turkey, and they were planning to assassinate and kidnap Israeli tourists and a former Israeli ambassador and his wife. The Israelis have been actually talking about this for a little bit. So it's actually, if you follow what Israel has to say, it's not much of a surprise. Uh, I was watching an update and reading an article about the Ukraine war written by one of these many bloggers that talk about it. And this was a Russian blogger. He says that the Ukrainians, right from the beginning of the war, had outnumbered the Russians in terms of manpower. I tried to figure out how, when he talks about the fact that the Ukrainians had about 160 to 180,000 troops in their regular army and about 200 odd thousand troops in their reserves, 200,000 troops in their reserves. Some figures actually talk about these reserves being as high as 6 or 700,000, but I would not be able to verify those claims. We know for a fact that the Russian Expeditionary Force, or the Special Military Operation Force, which is there in Ukraine, is around about the figure of about 20,000, including the local militias of the two republics of Donbass. So it really tells you that the Russians are probably, and I would not be able to verify this, but probably, as per these certain reports, fighting a battle in which, as far as manpower is concerned, they are outnumbered. There was an interesting report that the French had sent these Caesar howitzers to Ukraine, and one of the things that came out is that the Russians pretty much captured them within 2 days of them landing up in Donbass. There was a report, I don't know how much is that true, but the French have kind of denied it, of the Russians picking it up and taking it to Siberia to their workshops to break it down. An interesting thing before I come to Chirag's question about the NATO summit and the Finland and Sweden and that entire conundrum which is taking place, I'd like to actually talk to you about a small news that came out of CNN, and that's a very pro-establishment newspaper of the United States. It talks about increasing inclination of the White House in the belief that the Ukrainians would not be able to capture their territory, and secretly, a lot of Biden administration officials are feeling a bit nervous about this war. Let's go to the NATO summit. Much happened. There was a lot of camaraderie. There was a lot of talks. There were a lot of photographs and so on and so forth. There was a readout where I find two things very interesting, and I'm just going to read them out to you. It says that we continue to face distinct threats from all strategic directions. The Russian Federation is the most significant and direct threat to the Allies and uh, Allies' security, to peace and stability in the Euro-Atlantic theater. It talks about terrorism, and it says that terrorism in all its forms and manifestations continues to pose a direct threat to the security of our populations and of our partners. It also talks about we are confronted by cyberspace and hybrid and other asymmetric threats, and by the malicious use of emerging and disruptive technologies. When I say this, I think a lot of you will understand what I'm hinting to. It talks about we face a systemic competition from those, including the People's Republic of China, who challenges our interests and security and values and seeks to undermine the rules based international order. We know that the NATO summit was attended by 4 Indo Pacific nations, namely the Australians, the New Zealanders, the Japanese, and the South Koreans. So that was an interesting shift where the NATO is trying to probably pass a message and take some steps into their entry within the Indo-Pacific. Uh, Jens Stoltenberg, before the summit, actually spoke about 440,000 strong response troops, the quick response force that the NATO has within the European area would be increased to about 300,000. That's one of the biggest overhauls that you will find of NATO within that region. Coming to Sweden and Finland, and when I did this particular research, it actually astonished me when I actually read about what the history of this entire region is. NATO has been, as you all know, has been successfully been able to kind of move Turkey away and get their veto removed as far as Finland and Sweden is concerned. Turkey got its way. President Erdogan was able to actually negotiate as to what he wanted. There are news about the F-16 deal, F-35 deal, certain individuals, the uh, putting them on the terror watch list and so on and so forth has actually just moved forward. But I'd like to take a couple of minutes and actually talk to you about Sweden and Finland separately and their claims of neutrality and threats from Russia today. Let's talk about Sweden first. And Russians and the Swedes have had a long history of small wars and altercations. I'm going to start from somewhere around the 19th century, where on the 17th of September 1809, the period of Swedish rule got over in Finland when the Treaty of Hamina, this was post a brutal war between the Russian Empire as well as the Swedes, took place. This, this particular thing resulted in the almost a third of Sweden being acceded to the Russians. This particular area that was given to the Russians was granted some sort of an autonomous capability and was called the Grand Duchy of Finland. There were other areas that were also, kind of removed from Swedish control during this particular war. One of the biggest names that you would find is Leningrad or today's St. Petersburg. Coming to this century, during the Cold War, during the Second World War, the Swedish had some nefarious dealings with the Germans, especially during their war with the Soviet Union, and that was kind of noticed by the Soviet powers that time. During the Cold War, the Swedish maintained a kind of a dual approach. They publicly talked about, their neutrality policy and their not wanting to interfere in terms of anything. But during the 50s and 60s, the Swedes went on to a very, very intensive rearming program. And we all know today, Swedes have some very good aircraft and very good arms, as a matter of fact. India also uses a couple of, I think, anti-aircraft, anti-tank missiles from Sweden. And there are talks about the Gripen or some of, other aircraft being in line or running for the Indian orders. How far that's going to happen is a totally different discussion and out of the purview of this particular video. One of the things I'd like to tell you about here during the Cold War is that the US stepped in close to Sweden and actually signed an unofficial treaty of security over Sweden. As a matter of fact, in the early 1960s, US nuclear submarines were positioned close to the borders, close to the sea coast of Sweden. And this is something that one must understand when we talk about the so-called neutral countries turning hostile to Russia. If you look at recent history of the Swedes, their association towards the US, and not bad or good, but post their declaration of neutrality, they're still having an association with the US, and security treaties tells you what kind of position they were in. As a matter of fact, the Swedish government kept this particular thing in terms of the treaty with regards to with the United States secret till about 1994. It's interesting. This was actually brought out by a Swedish research commission by mistake, and this was put out into the public. And there was a huge hue and cry that happened during that time. But one just tells you the hypocrisy of the dialogues that are coming out with regards to this move of Finland and Sweden. Let's talk about Finland. As I told you, the birth of Finland was in 1809, post a war between Sweden and the Russian Federation, or the Russian Empire, I'm sorry, at that time. During the First World War, the the Grand Duchy of Finland declared their independence by actually putting out a statement saying that taking advantage of the Russian weakness during the revolution. If you remember the Russian Revolution of 1919, the Finnish fought two wars against the Soviet Union. One was basically the Winter War, and the second one is known as the Continuation War. They actually fought on the side of the Germans, and when the Germans started losing the war, they quickly switched sides. One of the things that happened was USSR, or the Soviet Union, was never interested in the region of as per se, and granted them their independence on strict neutrality terms, which was signed in 1948. This particular thing was re-ratified by Russia in 1991-92 time, post the breakup of the Soviet Union. So again, the story, and Chirag, I hope I've been able to answer your question. The story about Finland and Sweden isn't as clear as one sees it. The Russians have actually kept this particular thing in mind, that the Finnish and the Swedes would turn sides against them whenever the opportunity does come. So they won't be much surprised to see something like this. And if you see the statements coming out of the Russians, it pretty much says the same thing. Although, having said that, the Russians have promised to add and to strengthen their troops in the borders against Finland. These two countries, mind you, are socialists, in socialist democracies who spend a lot of money in the healthcare and so on and so forth. They will have to spend a lot more on defense today and wonder where that money is going to come from. There's a blockade that a small country called Lithuania has done on a Russian enclave called Kaliningrad. This particular thing was done by Lithuania, supposedly on the instructions of EU. And today, The Guardian reports that EU officials, who are increasingly worried about this blockade, are trying to diffuse the situation, even as the Lithuanian president says he will not walk back on his decision. This is a very, very dangerous decision that has been taken by Lithuania. Till the past 3 months or 4 months of this war, there was never an issue of transporting goods through a particular corridor that goes from Russia into Lithuania and into their enclave in Kaliningrad. Why they would do this is beyond me, or beyond a lot of other people, as a matter of fact, and even some officials within the EU. I'm not putting my opinion. This is something which is there. You can actually read it in The Guardian. The British Prime Minister says, and I'm coming back to Boris Johnson, who's been much in news because of his dialogues over the G7 as well as the NATO Summit. He talks about the accession to NATO. He finally comes out and says it. The Ukraine's accession to NATO was never close to being possible. What was this whole war about is anyone's guess. There is news about oil caps that the Americans and G7, as a matter of fact, had put out. They talk about they will be putting out a cap on the price of Russian oil, which is being supplied to various different countries in the world. They are talking about not letting the tankers get insurance. Let me just break it down. 90% of fuel tankers insurance happens in the United Kingdom, and about 75% of these tankers are actually owned by Greek shippers and Greek shipping companies. So there's a bit of a conundrum there. The Russians have actually countered this particular thing and have offered these tankers insurance from a Russian bank based in Moscow. The G7 said that they have intense and very positive discussions with the Chinese and us Indians about this Russian oil cap. This is interesting to see and note what is happening, because one wonders if the Russians are going to be asked to sell their oil on a particular less price, which does not give them profits, why would they sell it? And this is exactly what the former Russian president Medvedev actually put out in his Telegram channel. Thank you so much for listening to me rambling on about the Ukraine war and various other developments that have taken place within that particular European region. It is interesting. It is sad to see the Ukraine war dragging on the way it is, but the developments happening around it are pretty interesting to keep a track because each one of these developments, remember, affects you and me. And remember this the next time you go to fill fuel in your car, in your bike, in your truck, or whatever you drive. Till next time for another update on China, where there are certain little newsmakers which are coming out with regards to their economy, with regards their COVID, and so on and so forth. Please hang on, keep a track of my channel. For that, request you all to subscribe, press the bell icon, like this video, share it with your friends. And of course, yeah, please do let me know if there is something that you like me to cover, if there is some way that you like me to change the way that this whole thing is being done. This is being done ad hoc at the moment. I'd like you to kind of join me in these live sessions. I had about few people here. Uh, but I'd like more people to join. I don't want to fix a time right now as I'm also getting used to this entire thing. But till then, thank you for your support and your continued viewership. Jai Hind.